Hey, yo, lesson here, babe. You come at the king, you best not miss.
Wow, we've already started this show terribly. I didn't think it was even quite possible to goof this up. That wasn't even supposed to be the right track. That was, of course, Spanish Castle. Wow, man. Man, Mike Leon, it's been 2 weeks and I'm already effing up this show. Spanish Castle Magic. I still can't say Spanish for some reason. I don't know why. For those of you who stuck around who've not ejected or turned off the show so far, thank you for sticking around. I am, of course, Nick Saveri. My compatriot and expert in all things, both Raiders football and sports in general, is Michael Leon. Mike, it's Super Bowl time. What have you been doing this week to just to kill time till the game starts on Sunday?
Nick, how's it going? Thanks for having me back on the program. Nick, I've just been watching some Knicks basketball. Knicks with a good win last night against the Magic, 113-97. Carmelo, 20-plus points in 30 straight games. And, the Garden's rocking again and filling the time with that and college basketball, which is, this is kind of a dead period right after the Super Bowl of all you have is the NBA and college basketball to take you really into March Madness.
It's funny, and I thought I was talking to someone about this through Twitter recently about the NBA regular season. Mike, I know in the past, and the last time we had a strike-shortened season, we had the Knicks had gone on to the finals in '98 against the Spurs, and of course, people who recall the season, we tended when we talked about the Knicks being able to get to an NBA championship, we noted the fact that it was a strike-shortened season. For some reason, however, with the Miami Heat last year, as entertaining as the postseason was, we don't seem to pay as much attention to the strike-shortened season, despite Reggie Nelson of the Nets having something to say about that, apparently. Nets, of course, getting beat by the Heat the other night. Mike, turning our attention to football, we come across, of course, the NFL Championship, the Super Bowl this Sunday between the 49ers and the Ravens. I guess I'll throw it out there right now. Of course, the first time I'll say it, and probably not, sadly, the last time, the inaugural Hard Bowl. Actually, that's not true. It's really the second time. The two teams met about a year ago, actually, on Thanksgiving night. And probably one of the best pieces I read was, I forgot if it was Barnwell or someone on FootballOutsiders.com who had basically just threw out that game and had said that the game on Thanksgiving has absolutely no bearing on this, which is almost just flies in my face because I always tend to kind of bring up matchups in history when we talk about the way these games work, which I'll probably do when we talk about the AFC. But Mike, we're going to start with the conference championships, of course, leading up to the Super Bowl, and we're going to begin taking everyone to the NFC. Obviously, the 49ers went on to beat the Atlanta Falcons 28-24 a couple weeks back. The recurring theme for both games is the road team being able to shut out the home team. And that's something we saw in both games, of course. First game being the NFC title game. Mike, how do you explain the 49ers' pass defense to give up 17-0 to the Atlanta Falcons early? And is that something that could possibly play against them when they play a team that has an even more arguably dangerous passing attack, at least in the deep passing attack from the Ravens? Let's start with that 17-0 lead. What's Atlanta doing that the 49ers defense, despite being strong all season, just wasn't able to stop early on?
Well, Nick, I think the first thing Atlanta was able to do, and they did it against Seattle too, was the resemblance of a running game. When you start to hand the ball off to Turner and Jacquizz Rodgers, who actually did a good job for Atlanta in both games, free up the linebackers looking in terms of seeing whether or not it's going to be a run or pass. And then Atlanta, what we talked about numerous times on the podcast, has probably, one of the best receiving corps, of the four teams that were left with Roddy White and Julio Jones and Harry Douglas as their number 3 and then Tony Gonzalez as their tight end. So, and Matt Ryan, to his credit in the first half, just like in the Seattle game, really played well in the first half of this game. He threw the 2 touchdowns to Julio Jones, one for 46 and one for 20 yards. And Atlanta really played, good, solid offense. You see their first drive was 7 plays, 80 yards for, almost 4 minutes and change. Their second drive was 12 plays, 65 yards, for about almost 7 minutes, that drive. And if you're an Atlanta fan, you're sitting there going, San Francisco's defense is very the option. And Atlanta had a very good secondary. We talked about numerous times on this show. With some of the DBs that they had back there with DeCloud and Asante Samuel, and you're thinking to yourself, if you're Atlanta, let's force them into some third and longs, or stop the run, force them in third and longs, and make Colin Kaepernick beat you with his arm and not his legs like he did with the Packers the week before. This San Francisco critic, they started to run the ball efficiently, and they stuck to their game plan even when they fell behind. They knew they couldn't abandon the run. You had to get Frank Gore involved. If you look at plays in the third quarter, there was one drive where on the drive where San Francisco scored for a touchdown. I mean, their first 4 plays were all Frank Gore runs. And then, they capped it all off, with the Michael James 15-yard touchdown. They cut it to 17-7. But they didn't abandon their game plan, San Francisco, and their defense really, really tightened up. Especially in the second half, and it's the common theme of both these games with both hardball-led teams and shut out on the road opposing teams. And I think San Francisco must have watched last week's tape, with Seattle, because you can force Matt Ryan into some situations, and especially this playoffs, he's proven to throw some costly interceptions at costly times. He threw that one in the Seattle game when Seattle was down 13, and they ended up scoring, I think, 3 plays later on a Russell Wilson touchdown. And so, I'm sure it crept into people's minds. That's the other thing, the mental aspect of this, with Atlanta so many times this year falling behind. You think Ryan will, have one last-ditch effort, get him in the field goal range or touchdown range. And it just didn't happen for them in this game. So I think the big thing that San Francisco did was they stuck to their game plan. They're physical up front. They drafted 2 years ago. Singletary drafted, left tackle Anthony Davis out of our alma mater, Rutgers, and Mike Iupati from Idaho. And there was 2 big old linemen that really kind of changed the complexion of their old line to be more physical. They went out and drafted, Michael James from Oregon, who was a speedster running back. This offseason they signed Brandon Jacobs. He hasn't really helped much this year, but they drafted Anthony Dixon out of Mississippi State. It's been a power rushing attack, and Kaepernick has really fit in because he's a taller Alex Smith with it. He can throw a deep ball a little bit better. And as we saw in the Green Bay game, he's a lot faster and better adapt at running this style of read option that they incorporate into their offense. So they stuck to their game plan, and they knew their defense could hold them right there, and they got Matt Ryan into some third and long situations. And Atlanta's offense, went 3 and out for the first 4 possessions in the second half. So they really did a good job on them, and you credit Jim Harbaugh for making adjustments there in the second half.
When we talk about turnovers, after Gore's 5-yard touchdown to get it to 20-24 Falcons, you have the next 2 drives by the Falcons result in turnovers. Now, the first one being an interception thrown by Matt Ryan just on a short pass intended for Roddy White, picked up by Chris Culliver, who, of course, got himself in a little bit of trouble this week, talking about homosexuality in the league, which we might... Michael, maybe we'll get into that when we get around the league later on today. 49ers get the ball. To Atlanta's defense's credit, or actually more to Akers' just inability to apparently get it between the uprights lately, Atlanta doesn't suffer for that turnover. Where things go wrong, unfortunately, is then when you go to Matt Ryan with a fumble, recovered by Aldon Smith at the San Francisco 37. That leads then, of course, to the Frank Gore touchdown for 9 yards. At that point, it becomes 28-24, and the Falcons never get the lead back and, of course, go on to lose the game. Mike, for 2 weeks in a row, you give up a 20-point lead to the Seattle Seahawks. You give up a 17-point lead to the San Francisco 49ers. Are Atlanta fans and the organization, do they take any solace in the fact that they've finally won with Matt Ryan as quarterback and Mike Smith as coach? So they've gotten that playoff winless record off their back. But what do you make of, or rather, how does the team reconcile the fact that you go 2 weeks despite shutting out the opponents early on and being completely offensively dominating, and go on to lose not just the championship game, but come really damn close to blowing the game against Seattle, who went ahead and scored 21 points in the fourth quarter. What do we what do we make of the Falcons now?
Well, I mean, if you're a Falcons fan, you've got to take some of this into consideration. And there's been talk recently, and especially it came out in the Atlanta newspapers about Atlanta being one of the teams reconsidered for LA's option to relocate the franchise to LA. So that's been a big source of conversation down there on Atlanta sports talk. But I think if you're a Falcons fan, and I would put myself in this situation, I mean, you won the division for the second straight year. You made the playoffs 4 years now under Mike Smith. And, I recently saw a piece on NFL Network about Mike Smith coming from the Ravens coaching tree and having, been an assistant there. And some of these assistant coaches have gotten jobs throughout the league as being, Ravens assistants, like from Marvin Lewis, Rex Ryan, Mike Smith. And Mike Smith has really done a good job. They've really drafted well down there in Atlanta. The cupboard is not there yet. Everybody knows how much they traded up to get Julio Jones, who looks like a difference maker on the offensive side of the ball, especially this postseason. He had 3 touchdowns this postseason, some of them of memorable fashion, especially the touchdown catch in the Seattle game. Roddy White, they drafted him about 5 years ago, so he's been a good addition. Matt Ryan has kind of really made everybody forget about the Michael Vick days, and for the most part, he's been a great regular season quarterback. You can't argue with his regular season numbers. It's been the postseason deficiencies and the turnovers that he's had, especially just this postseason, that led them to losing at home. But you got to take everything in perspective. You lost by 4 at home to a team who was playing in their second straight NFC title game and had one of the top 5 defenses in the National Football League. So, and even with all that, it's just really one half of football that they didn't play well because they got outscored in the second half of this game. I mean, they were up 14 and a half. So I think if you're Atlanta, you take some solace in knowing that, hey, listen, we got the playoff monkey off our back. We know we can win at home in the playoffs. And we also know what we have on the offensive side of the ball. Jacquizz Rodgers is looking like he's going to be a really good running back complement piece, maybe even a starting running back in this league if they decide to let Michael Turner go. Roddy White, Julio Jones, like we said, are really good at the receiver position. You're good at the quarterback position. And in the O-line position, maybe they could use another O-lineman or two. And not to mention on the defensive side of the ball, they would need to adjust the D-line because, John Abraham was almost non-existent in this postseason. But I think, the division for them, Tampa Bay and Carolina were kind of up and down this year. Both didn't finish over 500. New Orleans didn't finish over 500. And they really had, I wouldn't say a stranglehold, but they know going into every year that they really only have to compete with New Orleans to win their division and get into the playoffs. So I think if you're an Atlanta fan, you take some comfort in knowing that, it wasn't meant to be this year. We played a team that was a little bit more experienced in terms of, they had just played their second straight NFC championship game, like I mentioned. And they had the propensity to win on the road. They had just beaten Green Bay, who won a title a couple of years ago. San Francisco did. So you lost to a team with a really good coach and one of the best defenses in the league that knows how to win on the road, and you only lost to them by 4 points at home. And you've got a lot of talent coming back. And I think if you're an Atlanta fan, the future is extremely bright.
Moving away then from the Falcons, the last point I'll bring up about Atlanta is I think the points you bring up are true. The home field advantage for this team is very potent, obviously. They are perennial lock to always be in contention for that division, with the exception of the Saints, of course. So they're set up for a pretty good future. And then obviously Matt Ryan's a top 10 quarterback. And you have, you could really make a good case there. That's the best receiving tandem in the league. And again, what we saw what happened with the 49ers wasn't so much that the 49ers defense got better. It's simply that Atlanta gave this game away. And Mike, you listen to Le Batard as much as I do, and that got brought up a lot on that show with regards to the passing defense of the 49ers having nothing to do with the reason that the Falcons gave that game up. And that's worth noting. Ironically, though, I think it's easier to recuperate from blowing a huge lead to never really being in contention. What I mean to say is, it's one thing to have a couple of weeks where you have a lead and then give it back. It's quite another when you're getting into the playoffs and just getting smoked every single year. And that's clearly not the case with the Falcons, and nor was it with the Ravens, of course. So the Falcons are in a pretty good position. As far as the Los Angeles move thing, Mike, doesn't it feel like almost every year there's a new team that gets talked about? Early this season, it seemed like Jacksonville. Now it seems to be the Falcons. There was a time when San Diego was on this list to possibly go out west. Is it just a case that Los Angeles is just desperately trying to get a team and just doesn't want to create the 33rd NFL team? Or are this just basically leveraged by owners trying to get better stadiums in, and just weighing the possibility of, waving that Los Angeles threat over the heads of fans?
Well, the Georgia Dome is a fairly, recent in terms of, stadiums. So I don't think it's something that the Falcons would need a facility upgrade. And like I said, this is all premature talk. And like you mentioned, this is something that's always mentioned in terms of relocation. You heard about Jacksonville a couple of years ago, Minnesota. So there's been a bunch of teams always mentioned with Los Angeles, and it's the second biggest media market. They've got not one but two, 90,000 plus seat stadiums that are just empty. And in terms of NFL football, obviously USC and UCLA playing those stadiums, but so they do have the facilities and the infrastructure to house an NFL team, and have housed an NFL team, in the 80s with our Raiders mix. So it's something that's never going to go away, especially when you're in that big of a market. But I think if you're an Atlanta fan, there's nothing to fret. You're in a big media market yourself, one of the top 20 in this country, and you've got an author out there, Blank, who, is like a co-founder of Home Depot, so, which is based in Atlanta, so a lot of their business interests are down there in the Atlanta area, so I'd be highly surprised if I see any type of move of an NFL franchise to LA. I think the commissioner he's not reluctant to get a team in that market, but I think, like you mentioned about them being the 33rd team, could make for scheduling conflicts and stuff like that. And you'd like to see an even number, and there's not enough teams right now. There's not enough city that's able to work with house another team that the NFL has really considered when you start looking at some of the logistics that would take to be able to have an NFL team in your city. So Los Angeles is the one that comes to mind, but there isn't another major city that's out of a national football team from a major media standpoint and a logistical standpoint. So I think you're always going to hear talks about that, but I think at this time that Atlanta's safe. But it was something that was recently reported down there by one of the local television stations.
Moving on then to the NFC representative of the Super Bowl, the 49ers. Mike, since the Giants lost 26-3 back on October 14th, the only teams that seem to give the 49ers any trouble seems to be teams from the NFC West. Against the Rams, went to overtime, tied it. Second game in overtime, and they lose it. And then getting basically stomped by the Seattle Seahawks. One thing I think about a lot this year is the revitalization of the NFC West. I think we all can agree not too long ago that was arguably the worst division in the NFL, as evidenced by the fact that a 7-9 Seattle team managed to get to the playoffs, and of course held serve and went on to beat a Saints team coming to Seattle, which speaks obviously of the potency of that fan base. Mike, what's especially compelling about that division is Colin Kaepernick's a good quarterback. I wouldn't say he's great. You have Sam Bradford, who I think the jury's still out with. Arizona at this point probably has you at quarterback because I don't see any other promise coming out of that team. And, of course, you have then the Seattle Seahawks with Russell Wilson. Mike, how do you assess the NFC West from the idea that it's not a division that really brought on a lot of huge talent in the free agency market, but simply drafted really to defense? Because when you look at defenses, every team in the West seems to have a very very solid defense. And quite honestly, if the Cardinals had a respectable quarterback, even if Kurt Warner would come out of retirement, they're probably winning 7 games with that defense alone. And we saw that with the 4-0 record that defense put up. How do you explain the revitalization of the NFC West, and how does the 49ers fit into that growth?
Well, Nick, I mean, unlike Major League Baseball, the NFL plays by, the salary cap rules. There isn't unnecessary spending, across the board where you can point to one franchise and say, look at all the free agents these people got. I mean, I think the Eagles come to mind when they got, Vick and Jason Babin, and they were able to get Nnamdi Asomugha. But if you look at what's happened with them, that team is yet to finish 8-8, or above. And in the 2 years that they've had this, quote-unquote dream team. And so different organizations go about it different ways. And if you look at some of the model with all the teams out west is twofold. One, now they all have competent coaches. If you look at St. Louis and Jeff Fisher, we all know what he's done in this league. And he's going to have, St. Louis. He already had them in playoff contention this year going into week 15. And he's going to He's going to be a very good coach and be there for a long time. Defensively, they're getting a lot better, with Chris Long and Laurinaitis and some of the pieces they added to the secondary through the draft and free agency. And then you look at Seattle. Pete Carroll has really turned around his second tenure here in the NFL. He's really adapted more to the coaching style of an NFL coach and not of a college coach. And what I mean by that is, I think back then he was a little too rules oriented as opposed to, kind of just being himself and making it more, friendly to play in an NFL franchise. It's different how you handle an 18 to 21-year-old that has college classes as opposed to, a 26 to 30-year-old who gets paid sometimes more than you do. So I think, there's a different type of process that goes into that. And I think Carroll's done a really good job reinventing himself. He's won the division. He's made the playoffs twice over there. Now with Seattle, he had a home run drafting Russell Wilson, and he signed that for him just in insurance, just in case. Who's a competent quarterback that we've seen, from the small sample size that we have of him in the NFL. They added Zach Miller at tight end. They drafted Golden Tate and were able to hang on to Sidney Rice and really revitalize Marshawn Lynch's career. And with all of that, really build on the defensive side of the ball. Some of Carroll's first-round picks went towards Earl Thomas, their safety. They drafted Richard Marshall. They drafted KJ Wright, at linebacker. So they have a lot of talented pieces in place on the defensive side of the ball. And like you were mentioning before, and it goes in hand with the Rams, competent coaches decided to start focusing on the defensive side of the ball. Harbaugh has really put his stamp on San Francisco, but some of the credit has to go to Mike Singletary as well. Like I mentioned before, drafting up front in the O-line, and Singletary did draft Patrick Willis. And so you throw in some of these guys that they've added, and now Harbaugh, who has experience playing in this league and coaching at not only big-time college programs like Michigan and Stanford, but this is a former Pro Bowler, and he knows what it takes to win in this league, and he's won playoff games when he was the Colts quarterback. And then lastly, Arizona has kind of been the mystery, like you mentioned. I mean, they started the season 4-0, and everyone thought Kevin Williams was a genius. They won at New England in week 3. And they are really built on the defensive side of the ball to be extremely successful going forward. It's the offensive side that really needs to come around. And I don't think there's really a revitalization of the NFC West. These teams are always cyclical in terms of what division, tends to be out on top. Sometimes you'll see, the NFC East would produce, 3 of the 6 playoff teams with one division winner and the other 2 wild cards. But right now what you're seeing in the NFC West is, 3 of the teams have really good coaches, and all of the teams have defenses, and we all know defenses win championships. So These teams are more in line to play better, especially on the road, as we just saw with San Francisco coming across country and winning in Atlanta, and be, a decent offense in Atlanta. So that's going to be the common component in this league, is defenses, and especially when you're playing in a division like the West, where you're going to have to travel a lot to the Eastern time zone and play some games there. A lot of times, and we talked about this on the show before, about the Raiders traveling cross country, playing East Coast teams and their record, and vice versa when an East Coast team goes to the West Coast. So it's important that, you pack your defense with you, and a lot of these NFC West teams are blessed with really good defenses and really good defensive players.
Before we wrap up the segment, Mike, how do you, when you step back and look at the decision to bench Alex Smith? At the time, Smith was 7-2, and I still keep struggling with trying to think of a time where we had a successful starting quarterback benched originally due to injury, but then never getting his starting job back. I mean, maybe the closest is Drew Bledsoe in the whole situation with Tom Brady back in 2000, but obviously Bledsoe never really was that much better. It's not like Bledsoe really had a winning record, not since that Super Bowl appearance back in '96. Is the case with the NFL just a situation where, other than the Harbaugh decision, you have it seems many teams and coaches seem to play it very conservatively, that even if you have a hunch that you can improve your team, even though you are in a good position, you choose not to for issues of job security and, I guess, some strange notion about upsetting the proverbial apple cart. How big a decision was it for Harbaugh, and why don't we see more teams why don't we see more teams take more daring decisions like that to possibly improve what could already be a good team?
I think that the decision for Harbaugh was kind of overanalyzed, and I'm going to say in this regard. Alex Smith, everyone knows, is taking 1 overall, but he wasn't the number 1 overall selection. A lot of people knew that, going in when he was drafted out of Utah originally in Urban Meyer's system, that he didn't have a big arm, he was a good decision maker, but ran kind of that option spread type of offense for Urban Meyer. So how would that translate to the next level? And then you go into the different coaching changes that the Niners have had over the years. I mean, Terry, Jim Harbaugh. They've had numerous coaching changes, numerous offensive coordinators where Smith has had to learn new terminology almost every other year. So it hasn't led to any consistency or continuity on his part. And even with all of that, he's been able to muster, decent numbers throughout his career. I mean, last season he had, over 2,000 yards passing. He had about 17 touchdowns and went to 5 interceptions. He won a playoff game, led them to the NFC Championship game where they lost to the Giants at home. But I think the key was, and I know Jim Harbaugh has mentioned this before, and it was mentioned recently on an NFL Network piece, is that he really liked Colin Kaepernick coming out of college, and a lot of people did. Kaepernick was not seen often because of where he played at the University of Nevada. They didn't have a lot of national televised games. But everyone knew Kaepernick was a big 6'5", wiry quarterback. He ran his pistol offense his coach at the University of Nevada. Was a guy who could get the ball down the field, but, lacked a little bit of accuracy and some touch. And, he was a little bit frail in the upper body, could go into his frame. And being out in the West Coast, coaching at Stanford, and having recruited Kaepernick at Stanford, he was able to really kind of know what type of player Kaepernick was, and last year, and kind of have him sit down and learn a little bit of the offense, which we see a lot of, coaches do now, not thrusting rookie quarterbacks in, although this year is, not par for the norm, especially with the success of RG3, Russell Wilson, and Buck. But I think Kaepernick got a chance to really watch the offense, practice with the team. It's almost like in college where they redshirt a player, and then that second season, the player has talent, but you want to get him bigger and stronger and have him learn the offense, and then kind of thrust him in there. Now, of course, he's a product of Smith getting hurt, and Smith was on a roll at 7-2, but, Wally Pipp got hurt and then led to Lou Gehrig. So, you have to take advantage of the situation. It's kind of part and parcel. You have to take advantage of the situation when put into it. And Kaepernick has been able to do that. Sans, maybe a game or two here where he didn't play extremely well. One of the Rams games that went to overtime come to mind, especially the one at St. Louis. I think he had 2 interceptions. But Harbaugh showed the confidence in staying with him and knowing what he had, just from kind of, being a quarterback himself in this league and knowing, when to throw the ball, when to hold it, when to make a decision. It kind of led to, Jim Harbaugh saying, I'm going to go with my gut. I know my team a little bit better than other people think they know the team, and I get a sense that Kaepernick can take us further than Alex Smith. And you know what? It's proven out that he's right, and there's still one game left to go, and Kaepernick could really win this game and kind of cement, Jim Harbaugh's idea of making that quarterback change, mid-season.
Mike, let's hold off there. We're gonna go to break, and folks, when we get back, we actually are going to go. Wow, I just totally messed up that segue. I'm so off today. Folks, when we get back, we are going to engage in a 3-way in a way that probably won't get any of us kicked off of the air for professional purposes. And wow, this is terrible. Okay, anyway, 3-way, and why it's not a surprise that the Baltimore Ravens won on Sunday. Please forgive me, this show is terrible. Bye. We'll be right back.
Man gave the word, all right? We either step up or we step the fuck off.
Okay, the transition was a little bit better on that one. At least I got the song I want that time, Mike Leon. I totally screwed up that last one. I don't even know. I mean, I like Spanish Castle Magic. I can't say Spanish Castle Magic for some goddamn reason. Okay, that sounded actually decent. Folks, we are, of course, back. This is the Nick Saveri Show with Mike Leon. And. That's 3 ands. And a special guest. A man near and dear to Rutgers University. No, let me go from this perspective. The co-founder, I'd like to say, of the Rutgers Cyber Athletic Association has been so kind to join us today, coming at us from the West Coast, where he is hosting Center Bowl. Jeez, I've lost track at this point.
14.
14? Damn, we're getting old. And the man who Mike Leon just recently said, "How do you sound so good? You sound like you're standing next to Nick." Ladies and gentlemen, David Harbacken joins the show. Dave, what's life on the West Coast like these days?
Well, now that everybody is coming in for the Center Bowl, it's exhausting, is what it is.
Yeah, is anyone else there? Is anyone else there with you in the room?
No, I'm actually still at work. But
okay.
I guarantee you they're at my apartment playing Madden right now.
Oh, nice.
Practicing for their games later tonight.
Oh, okay. Who? Oh, is this you including your friends or just Gaza?
Well, Gaza's there, but of course he's like we naturally do. We've roped everybody in. My neighbors been playing. My roommates have been playing him. So once we start playing, everybody comes out of the woodwork to start joining in. I'm thinking they're better than him, and then he beats them down.
Dave, we were talking before you joined us. We just talked about the NFC. So you get to move on to the game that I was most interested in, mostly because of how much I hate the Patriots as a Raiders fan, obviously, and then to some extent as a Ravens fan. Guys, if I were...
Really? So your love of Boston teams is not...
consistent?
Down over to the country?
It's funny because I completely go on the opposite with my good friend Elizabeth on this one. My buddy Elizabeth is a huge Patriots fan, but hates the Patriots, or hates the Red Sox. By contrast, I'm a diehard Red Sox fan, but I cannot stand the New England Patriots. So
I just hate them both. So.
That's fair enough. So if I were to say that since 2009, the Patriots and Ravens have pretty much kept it close in their 5 matchups since then. The only 2 times being blowouts, courtesy of the Ravens, both in a playoff game. Why should it have been any surprise to us that Baltimore put it to New England last Sunday?
It shouldn't be a surprise. They should have won last year. I mean, if it wasn't for the blown field goal or the dropped catch, which I still say was a catch, in the end zone, they should have won last year. So to me, it's absolutely no surprise that they beat the Patriots this year.
Mike, evaluate the following statement. The New England Patriots wanted no part of the Baltimore Ravens in the postseason.
Oh, I mean, I can't go that far because, they obviously have the track record of beating them before, just the year previous. I think Bill Belichick has really done a good job of drafting on the defensive side of the ball. Some of these linebackers and secondary players that they have, and especially the ability that he's gotten out of Pete Talib. We talked about it on the podcast, how he's really changed around that secondary, and Devin McCourty has played really well for them, and Gerard Mayo at linebacker. So I don't think they wanted, I wouldn't say they wouldn't want any parts. They have Tom Brady, so you can't go that far to say that. But I think Baltimore is just as confident on the other side because they know they should have won that game the year before, like Dave just said. And, they changed around the kicking game. Ray Lewis is healthy. They had no excuses this year with Torrey Smith, Bolden. They had no major injuries on the offensive or defensive side of the ball that they could point to and say, hey, we're missing this guy. So I just think the Ravens were a little bit more confident. And like I told you when we started the podcast a couple weeks ago for the playoffs, I just really felt the Ravens out of all these teams had the most playoff-tested team. This is their third AFC Championship game. They've been here before. They've won at Pittsburgh. They've won at Tennessee in Big Ten playoff games under this regime. So I just think they were ready, and this is their moment, like Ray Lewis said.
See, Mike, we're definitely on the same page, and that's, of course, we've been doing the podcast so long, which, of course, folks can find courtesy of the YouTube channel, youtube.com/NPZ1978. Actually, since we're all in the mood for plugging, we should be plugging away Twitters like crazy. Dave, you're the newest guest on the show. Where can we find you on Twitter?
At Center1603.
How appropriate. Mike Leon, where can we find you?
At the Kid Leon, DAKIDLEON.
And, of course, I can be found NPZ1978. Mike, I'm gonna give you a huge round of applause. In fact, I'm gonna go ahead and do it right there. You get a step above a golf clap. Dave, when we went through the playoffs, we did our predictions. Mike Leon, since week one of the playoffs, just rode the Ravens essentially to the Super Bowl. I, by contrast, had them losing to the Colts, and had them losing to the Broncos, and they should have if Radio Raheem Morris knew actually how to cover, or at least play the safety position well. But I did take them to beat the Patriots just because, as I said before, I think Baltimore is the team that's probably best equipped to beat New England. Mike, what made you so confident with taking the Ravens to go right through these playoffs, to beat the top two seeds in the AFC?
Well, I mean, there's a couple of things. When you're talking about the playoffs, you need a couple of things to go your way. First, you have to trust your coaching staff. I think John Harbaugh is really one of the best young coaches in the league right now. I mean, this guy's not even over 45 years old yet, and already he's taken the Ravens to 4 playoff appearances, 5 playoff appearances, 3 AFC title games, and now a Super Bowl. I just think he's one of the best young coaches in the game, along with his brother, obviously, who's his counterpart in the Super Bowl. I think on the offensive and defensive side of the lines, you really have to be really well equipped, and I think when they drafted Michael Orr and they have, Matt Burke at center and Brian McKinney up front, they've got a really good physical, experienced O-line. And then defensive-wise, Haloti Ngata and Paul Kruger and Terrell Suggs really give them an edge on a lot of other O-lines where they can go big and beef inside with Ngata and Cody. They can go speed rushers with Kruger and Suggs on the outside. And then to top it all off, you have to have some semblance of playmakers on the offensive side of the ball. Ray Rice is a 3-time Pro Bowler. He's from our alma mater, all 3 of us. And he's arguably one of the top 5 running backs in this league. We've seen now what Anquan Bolden is capable of from the receiver position. Torrey Smith is a good complement. And I told you week in and week out in this playoff that as long as Joe Flacco plays within his strengths and doesn't turn the ball over, the Ravens should win every game they play in this postseason, and he did exactly that, throwing for 3 touchdowns and no interceptions in Denver. He did the same thing in New England, no turnovers, and they actually forced the Patriots into 2 turnovers. So, and that's the reason why they've been able to be successful, and their playoff-tested experience and their ability to win big playoff games on the road, like I mentioned before with Pittsburgh and Tennessee wins, and now this New England win, and coming so close last year, I just think that this was their time, and they were the most prepared and physical team that could compete with the Patriots and any team in the AFC playoffs.
Dave, week one of the playoffs, you're paying attention, of course. Where would you rank the Ravens? I mean, if you look at all 6 teams in the AFC going to the playoffs, of the 6, who did you initially see going to the Super Bowl?
Well, as we all know from my Twitter feed, at the beginning of the playoffs picked the 49ers versus the Ravens, to which you said, no, that was not going to happen because the Ravens were too injured.
It's true.
But yes, I absolutely saw the Ravens. I just felt it was their time. They were by far a better defense than anyone else. They've been so close for so long, and they've just been knocking at the door. And I just sensed that. I knew that they were, and the other thing is, was playing in the first week, and we've seen this, year after year, like with the Giants last year, where you get to play that first game, and you just start to build momentum, and then you go into the second week, and the team with the bye has been resting on the side, whereas you've been fighting just to get there, and it can carry you through, and it did this year for the Ravens. They played with confidence, and they played with real momentum on their side.
I think
That's why I thought of it.
I think the two games that. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Mike.
Nick, not to cut you off, but that's a point because, you saw with the Giants, in their Super Bowl year in 2008, really play well down the stretch, winning at Buffalo, and then, taking the Patriots in that classic game and losing at home, and then just catching fire in the playoffs. And the same thing kind of happened with the Ravens, where, they're playing with their backs against the wall, needing to win a couple of these games to get in this postseason, winning that Giants game at home, and they, absolutely destroyed them. And it just kind of fed into the momentum, and then you come home, and like I said, they took advantage of Andrew Luck being a young quarterback, and they went out there and beat Indianapolis. And then it's just, like you said, 1 or 2 seed is really sitting around. Athletes are creatures of habit and repetition, and so when you're just sitting around for an empty week and there's no actual game, associated with it, it's just practice sessions, it's tougher to be in rhythm, and the Ravens just happen to be in rhythm because they've been in playoff mode for a lot longer than some of these other teams. So I think Dave makes a good point there.
Not to pile too much onto that, but it is very interesting when you notice that you look at the teams like the Giants and you look at this year's Ravens team. It seems that a disproportionate number of teams that get to the Super Bowl tend to be that team that played the extra week, be it the wild card team or be it the division winner that doesn't quite get the bye. What I find funny about both of your opinions is that we're essentially a Raheem Morris interception or knockdown away from Peyton Manning probably going to a Super Bowl. But that's going to be that's the way football works. One play completely changes our discussion, and Dave pointed that out with the Lee Evans possible catch, and obviously the Billy Cundiff blown kick that could have sent the Ravens to the Super Bowl last year. So I will give both of you the credit for essentially what happened. This is very similar to the Giants. You have a combination of momentum tied with a little bit of luck, and really just a better game plan and playing with a confidence that no matter how good the top seeds are in your division or in your conference, you're able to just simply win. And we saw that with the Giants, the first Super Bowl run when they beat the top seeded Green Bay Packers and the Dallas Cowboys. And we saw it, of course, last year, with wins against the Packers and, of course, the 49ers. This Ravens team, I think Dave's probably right. I guess they were due. I mean, it kills me because, obviously I'm a huge Peyton Manning fan, and again, if Raheem Morris could play safety probably as well as probably Gay Zaleski could have, we're not having this discussion. I get to possibly make a point that Manning's about to win his 5th MVP trophy. Dave, you got one more segment left in you, or are you going to leave from work?
No, I got some time.
Awesome, because now we get to talk about the game actually for this week. Coming up, Super Bowl talk, and why Dan Marino is going to look awfully awkward all day on Sunday. Stick around. Again? Really? This is just terrible. There we go. Thank you. Thank you, Biggie. Thank you. No, I don't really know who's paging him at 5:46 in the morning, even though it's the crack of dawn and he's yawning and wiping the coal from his eye. I'm going to stop right there. Thank you for sticking around for this abomination that has been a show today. I should have recorded actually while we were at break because I thought the funniest stuff probably came from there. Thank you again for listening to the Nick Severi podcast with Mike Leon and special guest. What the hell is that? Special guest Dave Arbacken. Moving to, okay, I did promise a tease about Dan Marino, so I guess I'll throw this out there. I'm apparently new to the story because, as Mike Leon so eloquently put it, the kid is 7 years old. I'm just hearing about this now. But best quarterback in South Florida history, Dan Marino, found with a love child. I'm getting this story courtesy of the New York Post, which, of course, take it for what it is. Mike, you seem pretty confident with how well known this story is. Is that a South Florida thing, or is that just basically something that was just kind of well kept in like small circles?
This is, look, we're talking about Dan Marino. Okay, this guy was, my mother went to college with Dan Marino at the University of Pittsburgh.
Wait, where are you taking this story to? I just want to make sure I... Okay, all right, fair enough.
What I'm saying is that, this is a guy who's been in movies, commercials. He's quarterback of the most, popular team in one of the biggest cities in the U.S. And he's one of the most, recognizable faces, in NFL history. And not, to mention, the ladies find him attractive, and you're telling me that all of a sudden that he had another child, he had a child out of wedlock to another woman. I mean, that this is a big shock. I mean, even in the article, it's mentioned about how he, he's been paying child support for so long, and it's really been kept a private matter. But the reason why I said it's not that it's been known is not that it's a Florida thing. It's more of I think it's more of a league-wide, Dan Marino thing. Hey, I bet you Marino, you have 3 kids somewhere around here. You've heard it from different players that have gone out and talked to him, and I remember talking to some people when I was working at ESPN in regards to, players actually going out, post games and things like that. So one of the big guys he used to spend going out was Dan Marino. So you hear little things here and there, but I mean, obviously this is just all being uncovered now. But like we said, the girl, she's 7 going on 8, so obviously this has been going on for a long time. And credit to Dan for, being so recognizable on the CBS, pre- and post-game show. And, none of this, it's still in the public spotlight, and none of this ever come into fruition.
I like that. I like the little sound effect right there. It sounds like Mike Leah made a good point.
That was my phone.
Okay. I didn't know we were giving points away like we're around the horn or some shit like that.
No, that's Gronty giving me his flight details. The only thing I have to say about this is I just wonder how many more kids he would have had if he would have won some Super Bowls.
See, why you gotta do that? That's not right. There's
It's
no need for that.
Kids out of wedlock than you do championships, but whatever.
Hey, do nothing.
Well, and I was saying this before about now. You were obviously both of you have lives, so you're not going to be obviously paying attention to the pregame show, and I probably won't be either. But I got to think that CBS has to be wondering how do you just gloss over this when you're about to do a 6-hour pregame show? I imagine Dan's just not going to be around for some of this. He's just going to be apparently in the background and doing some production stuff or doing production girls, whatever, I guess. But I see. I got you to laugh. That was kind of funny though. All right, so.
Let me piggyback off that, Nick. Someone working in the industry that knows how production sets work and how, meetings come about and, where they talk about the show rundown, especially a show of a 6-hour length. Now, I've never been a part of a show that took 6 hours, thank the Lord.
Well, some of our podcasts have gone on pretty long, but I mean, I'm just saying.
Yeah, I took you one Red Sox Rays game that, went into, the 16 innings. But what you do is you talk about these things with your producers as to how you want to address the subject, whether Dan does something in the first segment or, it's something that's not even mentioned, as CBS has had practice with, especially when, the Bill Cowher coaching rumors kind of surfaced in the last couple of years, and Cowher's a part of that set. So I would fully address CBS to kind of ignore the situation. I think Marino has addressed it already with a statement. They'll take that type of approach where, Dan's already, stated this. And you try to not take away from the game. 2 o'clock is when the pregame show, I believe, begins. And not a lot of people tune in around the 2 o'clock hour. So if they are going to do something, it would be in the first 2 segments. But I really expect CBS to kind of just, kind of push this to the side and say, hey, we're here for Baltimore, San Francisco, and if Dan is not comfortable talking about it, then we're not going to do it.
I think CBS personally probably released it on the down low because it's the only way that you're going to get ratings for that show. I mean, you're interested in watching it now. Would you have been interested at all in watching it had it not happened?
No, I'm pretty sure I could have found some paint drying in the apartment I could have watched before watching that.
Exactly. Now you're kind of curious. I would just stretch it out. And it doesn't, frankly, it doesn't matter because whatever reason, unless it's something outlandish that happens or is said, nobody's going to remember it. Everybody's going to remember the Super Bowl, hopefully.
So unless he were happen to go after Esiason, just beat his ass on the set, no one's really watching the show otherwise.
Right, exactly.
Fair enough. Okay. All right. Well, then let's fast forward to. That sounds so cliche. I know Dave's gonna call me out on that one. Going into this game, when you think of the matchup of the 49ers and Ravens, it's obviously not. I mean, the 49ers obviously are a pretty large national fan base, mostly bandwagoners from the Montana era. How does this matchup rank from previous Super Bowls when we think of the two teams going in? Mike, go first.
I think. I think I'm still. Look, I'm going to stay on the Ravens. I've been on this train the whole way through, and fortunately, we're at the 125th Street stop. We're not at Grand Central yet, so I'm going to ride them to Grand Central. I'm going to ride them to the victory parade. Down the Camden Yards there in the Inner Harbor. I really think Baltimore. I think they're the most experienced. Throughout this, and now especially against San Francisco, not having been in this spotlight before, Ray Lewis's Super Bowl experience is obviously going to come into play. The 3 AFC championship games, like I mentioned before, the power running game that they have with Rice and their ability to maybe control time of possession and Flacco has really not been turnover prone. This postseason, I think if Flacco is able to, really kind of stay within himself. You got to give Jim Caldwell some credit here, Nick, as much as you didn't want to in the beginning of the playoffs. You got to give him some credit for some of his adjustments, not only in game, but before the games and the game plans that they have, coming out of games, as to what they want to do and what kind of identity they want. And, some of the throws to get Flacco kind of jump-started in the passing game, they've been able to utilize Pitta and Dixon, their 2 tight ends. And I really think that Baltimore's got the advantage with Torrey Smith and Bolden on the outside, and that could really free up, some big chunks of yards for Ray Rice. I think Ray Rice will fully take advantage of, the biggest stage in his career. I saw him in person in the biggest stage in his college career, rush for, 150 and 2 touchdowns in a big Thursday night win against, one of the top 5 teams in the country, and I fully expect him on the biggest stage in his playing career to really have a big game. And I think the 49ers, I think they fall behind in this game, and the Ravens defense has kind of bend but don't break, and I think this will be a decent scoring affair, but I like the Ravens in this game, 28-24. I think it'll be a close game, with all that I just said. But I think the Ravens find a way to win, hang on to their lead. Niners make it close late, and they still lose.
Dave, in a time where that sounds like a movie trail. In a time where, no.
The world.
But thank you. Yes, that's actually better. In a world where no. Dave, it's an offense-driven league. It's a league that's slowly becoming more about names than it is about the game itself, like the NBA. What does it say about two teams that are led solely by defensive leaders in Patrick Willis for the 49ers and Ray Lewis for the Ravens, with 2 good quarterbacks? I would not necessarily say top 5 quarterbacks in the league. Does it debunk the myth about offensive prevalence because we don't see a Brady and Manning in the Super Bowl? Does defense still have a place in the league where the rules simply make it allowable to basically play arena football on Sundays. How do you assess the type of teams that we're seeing that we're about to see on Sunday?
Well, let's be fair. I mean, the old cliche for you is defense wins championships, and it's been true. I mean, if you look at the Ravens team that beat the Giants in the Super Bowl, I mean, they had what's his name, Trent Dilfer, is that
Yeah,
whatever, at quarterback, who they were making fun of him going into it, like, just don't turn over the ball. Like, we don't care. We just want anything out there as long as it's not you. And Flacco is, a better quarterback than him and probably would be a better announcer. But, I don't think that defense is at all removable. Really has. I mean, like, maybe we've been spoiled by having, Manning in the Super Bowl the last few years, or Brady's or things like that. I mean, that's really what attracts people, I guess, to it. But, defenses are there still. I mean, look at the Giants defense, the last couple Super Bowls they've been in. I mean, you had, Tuck and the host of the, morning show and stuff like that. And, they're not stars, and they did, play what they needed to. And actually, I'm interested very much in the offense of this game, especially for the 49ers. I don't know how much you talked about this in the segment before I was in, but I'm really curious to see how Kaepernick does here because, this is really the first time that we've seen, at least in my memory, a non-traditional drop-back quarterback in the Super Bowl. I mean, they usually have success. They have flashes of success, throughout the season. Vic played really well in Green Bay. First time I think it was ever that somebody had gone into Lambeau Field and won a playoff game. But, he didn't make it. So this is the first time that we've really seen, not the traditional, pocket passer in a Super Bowl. And I'm curious, one, if it's successful, how it's going to work out, and two, if it will be successful. I tend to think it won't be. I tend to think that there's a reason why, pocket passers have been successful because, one, injuries. They're gonna go for his head. I mean, granted, he's a big guy, and that definitely is a bigger advantage than it was with Vic and stuff. But I could see him. I don't know. I think it throws an interesting wrinkle in the game, and one that we haven't seen before. And I also am just curious as to what Alex Smith is thinking this whole time. Because frankly, he almost brought him there last year, and he's got to have a little chip on his shoulder too. Although I'm kind of happy I want to see him on the Jets next year, but we'll see. Anyway, that's my. I don't know. That's what I'm curious about here. And Flacco, I think on that side of the ball, I think, like Mike was saying, he's doing what he needs to do in order to win this game. He's got a really strong defense. He's got great running backs. He's got, good receivers. And that's why I think Baltimore's going to pull out this game as well. But I do think it'll be close. I'm terrible at picking out a score. I don't know. Your score sounds just as good as any, 28-24, I don't know. But, although, how many field goals are that involved? I don't know. But yeah, I tend to think that Baltimore's gonna win this game. I might actually give them a little bit more, well, let's see. I'll go 35-24. Just cause. Why not?
Mike,
that's consistent. I mean, that's what the Ravens have been, kind of scoring around. If you look at the three playoff games, they've been all over 24 points. So, and especially 49ers, they're averaging, 30 points per game in this playoff. So I expect it to be high scoring. Dave's right. It's interesting to see what Kaepernick does in this game. And I just think from that standpoint, that's where you get a little bit of the intrigue because of these two unknowns at quarterback, and you haven't really had that. In some of these big playoff games, in these big Super Bowls, the last couple of years, you've been spoiled by the Brady's, Eli's, and the Peytons that have been in it, Drew Brees, and these are quarterbacks with experience, and the pocket passes, what you're going to get. And here are two guys, one who hasn't really won a lot in his career and has been kind of, maligned in Baltimore for not being able to get them over the hump. And here he is in the Super Bowl. And the other one, a second-year guy who runs a wrinkle of the type of shotgun spread offense that are popular in college and not really of classic style NFL quarterback. So I am interested to see what Kaepernick does in this Super Bowl. I think he'll play okay because Baltimore's offense has yet to see this little wrinkle in any of the offenses that they faced. Whereas San Francisco has been able to their defense has been able to face a multitude of different quarterbacks this year, from what Russell Wilson brings, to what Matt Ryan and the classic dropback brings. So, San Francisco's defense does have the edge in that regard.
Mike, the Ravens to get to the Super Bowl had to be two of the best pocket passers in the league in Peyton Manning and Tom Brady. Defensively, how can they? Do you think they're able to adjust to Colin Kaepernick? The only mobile quarterback they saw so far of the three quarterbacks would have been Andrew Luck, and Luck only ran 4 times for 35 yards in that first round playoff game. So, Mike, how do you see them able to adjust to Kaepernick and that read option offense?
Well, the big thing is going to be their D line. Now, Suggs and Kruger, both have played, at Arizona State and Utah, have been able to see spread offenses in the respective conferences that, Utah and Arizona State are part of. They're both part of Pac-12 now, but when Utah was there and Kruger played defense, he saw a lot of spread offense, in his own practices and these type of read zone offenses that the NFL is, I wouldn't say moving towards, but it is an additional wrinkle in a lot of these quarterbacks' arsenals because they're able to use their legs and their feet. So I think it's really about, Baltimore's D-line. If they're able to read and diagnose the play before Kaepernick gets it out of his hands, I think they make the adjustment. But I think a key way to stop this is committing more into the box and daring Kaepernick to throw. It's gonna hinge on Ray Lewis and Ellerby being able to get to the outside edges. And, everyone knows Lewis's age, and Ellerby, just recently had an injury. So a couple weeks ago, before the New England game. So how those guys play with, in terms of their limited mobility, one for age, one for injury, is really going to determine, because if Kaepernick gets to those outside lanes, we saw A.J. Hawk and Matthews not be able to track him down from behind. So who's as fast as him on Baltimore's defense is nobody. So it's really going to be about keeping your contained lanes and definitely trying to get a hit on him and not falling for the read on the inside ditch. So I would think you're going to see Frank Gore have to, because of that, because of the speed that Kaepernick brings to the outside edge, I would think that they would actually favor for him to be able to hand it off and the D-line wouldn't crash down as much, which means you're going to see a lot of guys up in their three-point stance, waiting for Kaepernick to actually make the move, as opposed to some of the guys either commit to tackling the running back or commit to tackling the quarterback. I think you'll see guys be more hesitant, and you won't see Kaepernick have as many rush yards. That's one of the ways to prevent him from getting to the outside. And maybe, that gets you into third and longs where, you trust Kaepernick as a passer there. And I think Baltimore would say they'll take their chances with Kaepernick in third and long.
I guess it then falls on me for the prediction. I'm also going to take the Ravens as well. Partly for the experience factor. I do think that secondary for Baltimore is talented enough to take away a significant chunk of the passing game. And I really think Ed Reed playing free safety is going to get at least one interception and probably a decent return off of that. The 49er offense built around decent receivers. Obviously an aging Randy Moss, Michael Crabtree. And I think the Ravens are going to be able to put a man on Vernon Davis. And I think if Davis can get taken out of this game, if Davis can get his receptions reduced to maybe a little less, probably less than 10, I think that it's possible that he won't do enough damage. And I know for those who have been paying attention to Kaepernick's stats, Davis's numbers have dropped off too. But in a game like this, I think probably the best receiver the 49ers have is Vernon Davis. If the Ravens defense can take him away, and I think they can, I think the 49ers are going to lose. Score prediction, I'll go I'm like Dave. To me, it's a very arbitrary number. I'm gonna probably think though that the Ravens can at least get probably 3 touchdowns. So I'm gonna go ahead and say 24 to 17, Baltimore Ravens for Ray Lewis to end his career like Elway, ideally with a Super Bowl win. Dave, can you stick around? We're going to do one last segment on just going around the league, talk about some of the coaching carousel, and some interesting stuff about the Raiders. Did we lose Dave?
No, that?
Oh, I said can you stick around for one more segment?
Oh, yeah.
Cool. Okay, so since we woken Dave up, we'll see if we can wake the rest of you guys up on the show. Stick around. So he hasn't completely screwed up the show yet. Thank you for sticking around. My name's Nick Zaveri. Their names are Mike Leon, David Harbacken, and this, of course, is the show. Can be found youtube.com/NPZ1978. For the last time, Mike Leon, where can we find you on Twitter?
At DAKIDLEON.
David, where can we find you on Twitter?
At Center 1603.
And, of course, me, NPZ1978. My Twitter, folks, keeps blowing up. I even got retweeted by Dan Le Batard this week, folks. Join the revolution. Join the show. You too, like David Harbacken, can be a guest as well. I guess the big news around the league is focused on the coaching changes. Obviously, we're not really getting into free agency yet, and I think one of the biggest free agents will be probably Alex Smith when this game's over on Sunday. Dave, Mike, when you look at the changes we've seen in coaching, which name seems to be the one that jumps out as the biggest head scratcher? Dave, go first.
I don't know. To be honest, I haven't really paid that much attention to like the coaching carousel. I tend to get into the hot stove stuff after the food is done cooking. I've been paying more attention to the the Super Bowl this week and everything else. But I mean, as far as the coaching carousel, I don't even know, to be honest with you. Go to Leon; he'll help you with this one.
Well, no, before I jump to Mike, who has these names like memorized at this point. I think, Dave, one name I'll throw out at you, and just to kind of get your opinion, is Lovie Smith of the Bears this year. Bears, of course, don't make the playoffs after going starting the year 8-3. Not selected by any team at the head coaching helm. Was offered a couple of defensive coordinator positions, which he turned down. Do you find it all surprising that a coach who had been to a conference championship and to a Super Bowl, all of which within the same decade, doesn't get a sniff for a head coaching job, whereas someone like Andy Reid, who's been to one Super Bowl and has lost multiple NFC title games, and in the last 2 years has definitely not been a very stable, consistent, winning head coach, got scooped up within 2 weeks by the Kansas City Chiefs. Does that seem incongruous to you at all?
Yeah, I mean, it is a little ridiculous. I mean, Andy Reid, I think, has always been overrated. I think a lot of it is just, a lot goes into it. I mean, certainly there's, there is a racist element to it, like an underlying one, I don't think it's necessarily, purposeful, but I think it's brewing under the surface kind of thing, just happens to be done. I also think that Andy Reid, it's a matter of what you build up as your reputation, kind of like what people think of you rather than what they think of your record. And people, I don't know, Andy Reid has always just been liked by the press and the league, and I don't necessarily know why. I mean, yes, he in the early years when he first came to Philadelphia, he did a decent job with them. But I mean, really, he had some good teams there, and he should have had much more success, which he didn't. But people always talk about him, and they have, and I can think of other coaches that have not been that successful, but have just built up a reputation that's made people want them. Which I don't think Lovie Smith necessarily did. I don't think that he, who talks about it? I mean, yes, it's also a matter of marketing yourself. I mean, to you're the face of the franchise, you're the face of whatever else. I mean, Bill Parcells, tremendously successful, but also built up a reputation like Bill Cowher did. I mean, Bill Cowher went to a ton of, like AFC championship games and everything, but for a long time, he really didn't win. And yet, people were talking about him. They wanted him for so many years, even before he actually did win the Super Bowl. Just because it was, I mean, he built up a buzz around himself. And he's not necessarily the best example because he actually did have success. But I'm trying to think. There's coaches that, if I thought about it hard enough, that definitely built up this buzz around themselves that makes them desirable. And nobody ever talked about Lovie Smith.
I will go to I'll go with the, not to cut you off, Dave. I'll go immediately to the college ranks when I think of an unqualified head coach who keeps managing to land on his feet. And I'm going to go to Lane Kiffin.
Absolutely.
That's it. Just what's that?
Once you said college, I immediately thought of him.
Yeah, no, it's basically absolute fraud. And I think anyone who watched USC this year probably is on the same page with me as well. You look at what happened with Tennessee with some of those NCAA violations, and he left to safely land where he was the offensive coordinator at a time with Pete Carroll as head coach, where there was obviously some success in national championships won. Mike, I'll push that then to you as far as the Lovie Smith situation, but also the speed in which Kansas City hires Andy Reid. Assuming you're a member of the Hunt family, you own the Kansas City Chiefs. Obviously, Andy Reid's a name that is perceived as being a winning head coach, but are you going to quickly hire him as fast as the Hunts did in this offseason?
Well, I think you guys are taking it from the wrong perspective. I mean, now Kansas City wasn't privy to what the rest of the teams in their own division would do, like San Diego hiring Mike McCoy, from Denver as the offensive coordinator. But they saw Oakland go with Dennis Allen, who was a rookie, first-time defensive coordinator, with Denver. And then as a head coach, he inherited a team that was 8-8 and one of the top offenses in the Raiders. And they're kind of abreast this year and gone 4-12. So if you're Kansas City, you're sitting there going, here's a big-name coach who 13 years ago led a turnaround, for a franchise that was really kind of second tier to not only their city, but to the NFC East. There's really a lot of Cowboys, Giants talk. And Reid has not only made the Eagles respectable, but he's taken them, to the 5 NFC title games and the 1 Super Bowl and the 8 playoff appearances. So here's a big-name proven coach that we can get in a division that we feel right now is kind of weak, because if you really look at it, Peyton Manning, some would say, has a stranglehold on the division in terms of, what he's shown he can do offensively in just his first year with Denver. I think that from the other perspective, how many more years do you really expect Peyton Manning to play? And I think the playoff game was unfortunately a brutal example of cold weather and him showing some signs of age and not being able to put some juice on some of his old fastballs there that he would normally, throw to his receivers that were open and then let the opportunities for the Ravens secondary. So if you're Kansas City, you have a chance to kind of restart this and restart it with a guy who's not only had success in this league, but is coached at the highest level and reached, the highest accomplishment in the sport, which is getting to a Super Bowl, and losing to, Bill Belichick, which is, I would put that on my resume if I could. I don't. If you're Kansas City, I don't think you second guess the move. To kind of piggyback on Dave talking about the Lovie Smith thing, it's funny about these minority candidates, but I think Jim Caldwell made a good point this weekend, and you see it a lot of times during Super Bowl week. These guys using the media day on Tuesday as kind of a forum to address whatever it is they want to talk about. And Caldwell, kind of made it a point to say, we don't really have a lot of minority coordinators and a lot of guys who are in those positions to where the next step would be a promotion to, a head coaching job. And that's in turn why you're not seeing a lot of guys being interviewed. And I think it's very shocking that no one has taken a chance on Lovie Smith, especially with the defensive, minded background that he has. And the fact that he just went 10-6 this year, with a team that was beset by numerous injuries to key positional players. Just with Jay Cutler going down a couple weeks with a concussion is one example. And I think, he's proven, taking them to a Super Bowl, that he can coach in this league, and he hasn't really gotten a sniff. So, look for the NFL. It's been talked about in numerous places about, revisiting and revising the Rooney Rule. But in terms of the coaching carousel that took place this offseason, the one that really, there's two that head scratch me, but the Mark Trestman thing, for him taking over for Lovie Smith, I mean, it was shocking that Lovie was even let go, especially it's not like they lost their last game at Detroit. They won their last game and were sitting around hoping Minnesota would lose, which they almost typically did, and they would have gotten it. Well, the shocking one for me was kind of Buffalo Bills hiring, Syracuse coach Doug Marrone, because not so much that Marrone is not capable of coaching the National Football League. He went from the NFL to college as the former Saints offensive coordinator, but I was just kind of taken aback by them hiring, a coach really out of the college ranks who hadn't done so much in the college ranks. Syracuse, everyone knows, plays in the Big East, and it's kind of a watered-down conference, and here's Marrone struggling at, 7-5, 5-7, 7-5 in 3 years. Guy finishes with a 24-24 overall record, and he's rewarded with, one of the premier 32 jobs, in the sport. So I was really taken aback by that they decided to go with Doug Marrone, and we'll see how that works out. Some of the other coaching things around the league are, there's lesser-known names, Gus Bradley taking over in Jacksonville, Rob Chudzinski in Cleveland, but this one to me was kind of like the head-scratcher because at least those guys have been coordinators at this level and for successful units that they were coaches of. Marrone was kind of orchestrating a college program that was mired in mediocrity, so it's kind of weird that he was rewarded by that, by having the Buffalo job.
Marrone, the theory I came up with when Marrone got hired was it was an issue of geography. When you look at Syracuse and Buffalo, it's about 2.5 hours apart, and both schools seem to run under the same media circles, and I get the feeling Marrone, just based on that location, I think was elevated to becoming a better candidate. I agree with the Mark Trestman, your feelings, rather, about Mark Trestman. The guy coached in Oakland. This offensive coach has been around the league and has really shown me no reason to be a head coach. And when I look at the changes, and I'm looking right now, this is courtesy of CBS Sports that has a great coaching tracker. And you look at the in list of everyone who's in, you look at the out list, obviously. To see Mark Trestman in and Lovie Smith out is probably the most baffling of all of these. Gus Bradley for Mike Mularkey, I mean, you can flip a coin on that one. Chip Kelly and Andy Reid is going to be really interesting. I think Chip Kelly's offense, Mike, I'll claim ignorance. Chip Kelly's the Oregon coach, right?
Correct.
Former Oregon coach, okay. See, on this show, folks, we say it's okay to say I don't know. Mostly because we have Mike Leon here. But it'll be interesting.
It would me because I had no idea.
But basically, I mean, I look at Kelly as what I guess would be considered an innovative offensive mind in the NFL, and listen, the way things are moving with the read option offenses, and going back to Dave's point about Colin Kaepernick, it's very telling this year that you look at some of the most successful quarterbacks this year were Russell Wilson, Robert Griffin III, and Colin Kaepernick. 3 quarterbacks who are extremely mobile, very accurate, and again, I feel like I go through this all the time, every couple of years with a major shift in the NFL, and when we talk about the next big thing, whatever that is, and I mean, for crying out loud, we once thought the Wildcat was the next big thing. There's a lot to be said about these different type of quarterbacks, and that might well be why Chip Kelly is getting this job, although I'm not quite sure how Nick Foles fits into that, and I don't know if even Foles will be the starter, although I tend to think Vic will probably not be returning to Philadelphia. Bruce Arians in Arizona seems to make a lot of sense for me. It's ironic because the former head coach of Arizona was Ken Whisenhunt, who was the former offensive coordinator in Pittsburgh, which is where Bruce Arians comes to us from Pittsburgh after he was replaced by the current former Arizona head coach Todd Haley. So I understood the Arians hiring. Rob Chudzinski, I don't get coming from a Panthers offense that really was not that impressive, and I don't necessarily think Pat Shermer warranted getting fired, but I know they are going through some major ownership changes. Mike McCoy, I'll claim ignorance on that one. I don't quite see that and how that works out. But Norv Turner clearly had to go. I just think the way that team was operating. Mike, what as far as the GM though for San Diego, he was also let go as well, correct?
Yeah, AJ Smith was fired.
Okay, the appropriately known as the Lord of No Rings, one of the only times I ever found LaDainian Tomlinson at all remotely funny. We've got predictions. We're talking coaches. Mike, real quick on the Raiders decision, and Dave, I can bring you in on this too. Dave, you're obviously familiar with Tony Sparano this year with a train wreck of an offense in the Jets. After an 11-5 turnaround season for the Miami Dolphins, has really not done a whole heck of a lot in the league. Is now the assistant head coach to the Oakland Raiders, focusing on the offensive line. Dave, I say Tony Sparano to the Oakland Raiders. You say what?
Good luck.
Thank you.
I have to say to you about that. Although, people have success after they leave the Jets. I will say that. I don't know. Yeah. I mean, look at Pete Carroll. He wasn't that successful on the Jets, and then went to the college ranks, and now he's pretty successful in Seattle. I mean, there is something to be said about the New York media market and how it just takes a certain personality. Not that he was the head coach there or anything else, but just coaching there and doing anything there. As you would know, as we would all know, growing up in that area, it's just different. In Miami, Miami has had problems for so long that I don't know, but the Raiders do too. So I don't. I will tell you this: every week, whenever I don't actually play in a football pool, but my friend does, and he will oftentimes ask me for advice about the various games and what I think is going to happen. The one time whenever it comes to a Raiders game, I always say, you know what, I have no idea what's going to happen with the Raiders. I have no idea. They will pull out wins that I absolutely don't think that they will, and they will lose games that whatever I pick for the Raiders, they always do the opposite. I'm curious, since you're such big Raiders fans, what do you guys? I mean, you probably talked about this before, but what do you think about? I mean, it's been a year now, but since the death of the big man, do you think that helps? Or
that's a great question. Mike, I'll go first, and then I'll hand it to you. Mark Davis strikes me as Tommy Boy. Not just in the way he looks from that Chris Farley movie. I really think he inherited an organization that he has no idea what he's doing. I think Reggie McKenzie as a GM seems definitely is qualified for the position. The Dennis Allen hiring, I'm still wondering about. And Mike always brings this up when we talk about a Raiders team that had gone 2 years in a row 8-8, most success they'd had since the Super Bowl season, drops this year to 4-12 with arguably a good enough quarterback in Carson Palmer, a diminished running game, even though you have a great running back when he's healthy in Darren McFadden. I'm pretty convinced at this point that if somehow Mark Davis was to give me the team, or maybe even better, to give Mike Leon the team, that team's winning 10 games within a season. I think Davis has no idea what's going on, even as evidenced recently by trying to hire Ray Anderson of the NFL. Ray Anderson, of course, known as the penalties guy in the league, to take on an executive position with Oakland. I think the Raiders family is desperately trying to find someone who can take over at least as aggressively and as with the kind of foresight that Al Davis had. And unfortunately, I don't think his son's equipped for it. Mike, I'll throw that to you, though.
I never thought of Mark Davis in that light, but in terms of the Tommy Boy comparison, but I think that you can draw some parallels from the fictional character from that movie.
I love how analytical you want to bring this. I mean, I just basically called him a fat, blonde, hairy slob, and your response is to say, "Oh, I never really thought of it that way before."
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's the comparison though, but the problem is that when you make that comparison, the way the movie ends, Tommy Callahan tells the company and gets everybody their money, when he sells to Zelensky Auto Parts. So at the end, everyone kind of reveres Tommy and realizes that he's a chip off the old block and he learned a lot from his father. So we're taking it from that premise. There's still a lot to be done. I told you on previous podcasts, Nick, that I wasn't thrilled with the Dennis Allen hire. I think Hugh Jackson is really one of the gifted offensive minds in this game. It's just evidenced by the years he spent, as an offensive coach with USC, with the Bengals, and what he did really with Carson Palmer, and that's why he made the trade and pulled the trigger to bring him in. We talked about the Raiders last year were ninth in passing when Carson was at the helm and second in rushing in the NFL. So that equates for a top 6 offense in this league. And they just needed to make some tweaks and adjustments in terms of drafting on the defensive side of the ball. And, fortunately, with the Carson trade, they lost some picks. So, it's going to take time to build up that side of the ball. And I think Dennis Allen is kind of showing that now, that he's got to kind of strip this thing down a little bit in terms of building back up the defense. And, they brought in Greg Knapp, and me and I both complained numerous times over different text messages to our games of Knapp's offensive systems and how Carson clearly showed that he had regrets, even though he threw for probably the most passing yards he's thrown for in the last couple of years. But that's because the Raiders were losing in a lot of games and were trailing. And so they do that. They bring in Greg Olson as the team's offensive coordinator. They bring in Sperano to coach the O-line, which needed some help this year. And they bring in a different style of run scheme that they think will help McFadden and will help Marcel Reese and some of these backs, and Tywan Jones, some of the backs that the Raiders have. So I think the jury's still out as to Dennis Allen and the whole regime. Now, as far as Mark Davis, I think that it was interesting that he hired Reggie McKenzie, because everyone knows McKenzie came from that Packer tree of guys who are really good at drafting and evaluating talent. And McKenzie was a former Raider linebacker, so it kind of seemed hand in hand. And I think Mark Davis is trying to kind of carve out his own niche, but not be like a Steinbrenner where he's meddling and, like Hank and Hal right now. Hank is more of the, the outgoing one, the one that's always in the press clippings, whereas Hal is, the day-to-day business. And I think Mark Davis is trying to kind of be a blend in between the two. He knows his strengths and limitations. He knows that he doesn't know too much about the football side. And he said from day one, he wanted to bring in a guy who knows football operations, and he's entrusted this whole kit and caboodle to Reggie McKenzie. So we really have, unfortunately, as Raider fans, have to endure a couple more years, which is, different from what Al would have done, which is probably had fired Dennis Allen after the season and no continuity to the coaching staff or anything like that. So I'd like to give it a couple more years, but the Tommy Point comparison is pretty funny and accurate in terms of how they've gotten off to the wrong starts, where Tommy kind of got off to the wrong start selling the auto parts on the road. And, Mark Davis, so far, it doesn't look like the hire of Dennis Allen and McKenzie has gone too well, but, the movie's not finished yet.
It's, I'm reading right now just the information about Greg Olson. This is quite funny for the new offensive coordinator for the Raiders. According to Raiders.com, their press release, Olson among the several bullets regarding him. Known for having explosive ground games that ranked among the league's top 10 in rushing plays of 50-plus yards during 4 of his 6 years as an offensive coordinator. I think we can all agree that the number of times a team has 50-plus rushing yards on a play is such an aberration and such an outlier that it has absolutely nothing to do with one's coaching prowess as opposed to bad defense and maybe just one good block and someone getting freed open. But I'm not going to read the rest of the bullets. I just think it's silly. Davis scared. Well, yes.
Well, Nick, I think your reservations, and you had texted me before about it, was basically, just this year as to what Jacksonville's offense did. And, I don't really think you can judge Olsen off of just Jacksonville this year. No Maurice Jones-Drew, Chad Henne under center for a lot of those snaps. Second-year quarterback Blaine Gabbert, makeshift O-line, no real threat in the passing game besides Justin Blackman. So I don't think you can really take a 2-14 offensive season, into consideration when you're considering this guy. So we still got, we got to see. The Sperano thing, I was upset about it as well, but then it was more so because I thought he had been hired as an associate head coach, and we come to find out he's really the O-line coach. So we just got to wait and see what happens mid-season. I think Olsen has got a track record of, really turning on Mark Bolger and Steven Jackson in that Rams offense when he coached there. So we really just have to wait and see a coach, unfortunately.
Dave, I guess to sum up your question, we're trying our best to do so, is that it's a huge undertaking, because I can't think of, and even the Steinbrenners are very delusional when they think about their hold on the Yankees, because that's really only been since the 70s, and the Yankees as a franchise has been way successful prior to the Steinbrenners taking over. The Oakland Raiders have only had one owner. Well, actually, that's a lie. They had two, but prior to Davis becoming owner and general partner back, I think it was around I want to say it was around the early 70s when it happened. This team is indicative of one individual, and it's very clear that there wasn't a plan in place for when Al Davis was going to die, sadly. And his son doesn't seem quite equipped yet to take over. And as Mike and I think are looking at, it's a whole different regime. I mean, the positive is that with the former owner, there wouldn't have been a team in place to really help put a good organization together. There was never going to be a GM. There would have never been a consistent head coach, as indicated by the way Davis had been for the last few years of his life. We can only hope Mark Davis is putting the team in capable hands. But what I wonder is, if that's not the case, is Davis simply going to try to sell this team? Because that's really where the money is for the Davis family. This is not this is not like the Steinbrenners and ships and owning a shipping company. The Oakland Raiders is the source of income for the Davis family. If this is not working, how quick are they going to flip this team over to, I don't know, a real estate company like the Oakland Athletics did back in the 70s after their owner had passed away? And we're now seeing with Billy Beane and Moneyball the response that they had to have because of what Sandy Alderson told Billy Beane years ago, which was, this team is never going to bring in money. It's never going to spend money. You're going to have to either do with what you've got, or this isn't going to work. And it kills me. It kills me knowing that I look at and they share the same facility. You would think at some point Beane would pull Reggie McKenzie aside and say, you know what, I know a couple things about being a successful GM. We may want to talk sometime. But that's not seeming to happen. And obviously, it's two different sports, so it can't happen. But I would love to have Beane give some kind of understanding of analytics to the Oakland front office. We are way past.
I will say this about, there is a huge difference. Even though they play in the same city, there's a huge difference between the Raiders and the Athletics. The Raiders do bring in money. I live in L.A., and trust me, they haven't been here for years, but, everybody, well, not everybody, but a lot of people I know are still Raiders fans down here in L.A. Nobody's a Rams fan, but they're Raiders fans. And, the Raiders, up in Oakland, you too. Somebody in New Jersey and Miami. They are a brand like the A's are not, and so it's not that they don't bring in money, and as far as having one owner or one family, I agree with that. But like the Hunts have been in control of Kansas City, or I don't know how long the Hesses have been in charge of the Jets, but it's been at least a long time. It's not necessarily the one owner; it's the personality. That's the thing about George Steinbrenner, is that he was a personality, and so was Al Davis. And then when that leaves the organization, the impact of it is interesting. I do think the parallels between this, how Steinbrenner, not the parallels, but the comparison between how George left it to his sons versus how Al Davis left it. There are some interesting parallels there. And I also think, as people got older, Steinbrenner's attitude was always, I really don't think that I've had this conversation with him many times, but, I think Steinbrenner was all about making the money. I think he was about winning in his mind, but he didn't know how, which is kind of related to Davis, especially towards the end. He wanted to win, but he just didn't know how. And when Steinbrenner, I mean, Steinbrenner, if you look at the Yankees when they actually started to become a success in the 90s, because they were not in the 80s. I mean, when Steinbrenner took over, I mean, yeah, they had a little run in the late 70s, and then throughout the 80s, they were terrible. And Steinbrenner got suspended by the league in the early 90s. Gene Michael took over and actually built a farm team. That's when you had Derek Jeter come up and Bernie Williams and all those other players. And then when, Steinbrenner came back after a few years of winning, then he starts going after, Giambi and all of these big names to sell jerseys. And then you saw them not win as much in the 2000s. And Davis, at least, I'll give him credit in terms of he absolutely tried to win. He didn't, he didn't really go for the people who are going to sell jerseys. Jamarcus Russell is not going to sell jerseys. I'm sorry. And he just made. I think he made. Sometimes people get so clouded by wanting to win that they don't know how. And like Mike was saying, I think over a long, over the longer run, there is positive signs for the Raiders. And I think that actually will help the Raiders in terms of, why didn't we win right now? Let's just change everything. I think, having the benefit of having a few years, a longer-term vision of what you're going to do, I think will ultimately help the Raiders. And whether or not they sell it or not, or, I mean, I don't know about that. Whether or not that will help them if they did sell it. I mean, it depends on who they would sell it to. You need to put football people in place who have the vision to do it long term. But I don't think that necessarily the Oakland A's analogy works the same with the Raiders. It just doesn't. I mean, the Raiders are they are a brand more than the A's are. They just are, even though they play in the same stadium.
What I do find funny is that my friends who are Cowboy fans, and I find a disproportionate number of them in this area, get to live what Mike and I have lived with for the past few years, in having an owner who simply refuses to think of a team as an organization in the sense of hiring different staff people to really help run the team well. The best example of that, I think, clearly is Robert Kraft with what happened with New England, hiring Scott Pioli, hiring Bill Belichick, and really establishing three good minds that all knew their responsibilities very well and kept to that. Jerry Jones in Dallas doesn't seem to understand that and probably will not. And this is evidenced by a person who still gives the injury reports during the week, who still is in the locker room with players, who still is standing on the sideline with players, and doesn't seem to offer an environment for any head coach or prospective GM to ever be able to take an active role in leadership, which is probably why we're evidenced to see a Cowboys team that allegedly has a lot of talent but has very little to show for it in January. Final thoughts on the game, guys? We are breaking records for the length of today's show. Mike Lee, I'm going to let you go first.
Well, I think, it's just kind of summarize, what we were just talking about with the Raiders. But like I said, I agree with Dave in terms of the branding perspective that the Raiders are a national brand. And so you just look at us, two fans from the Eastern Seaboard that are Raiders fans and are, card-carrying members of Raider Nation. It's a little bit different in terms of the A's Raiders analogy, but time will tell what happens with that organization and what happens with the GM and coaching moves and all these coaching moves around the league. But my final thought is really about the Super Bowl and the chapter of this Harbaugh one, which let me tell you something. These two guys are both in their early 40s. Both these brothers have had a propensity right now for being winners, not only at the college level, but at the pro level. We've seen what their father has done, at Western Kentucky winning a national championship. And now here we are, almost, 20, about 12 years to the date where his two sons are playing in a Super Bowl as head coaches. I think these two guys are going to be around for a long time. This could be the first of, a couple of Harbaugh Bowls, to play on the pun there. But these two guys are really good coaches that are really in the early times of their careers. They both have young quarterbacks that are going to only get better from this experience of playing in the big games. They both have good running games. with, you know, Frank Bourne and Michael James for San Francisco, Ray Rice and Pierce for Baltimore, and they both have defensive-minded approaches to the game, and you're seeing it in how good San Francisco and Baltimore's defense have been this postseason, both pitching shutouts in the second half on the road in the championship game. So, you know, America, unfortunately, you know, this may be part one of what could be maybe a three-part between the, you know, you thought you had it with the Mannings, but the Hardballs look like they're going to have a stranglehold on this for a little while here.
Dave?
I don't know if they're going to have a stranglehold on it for a while. I mean, I think that they're good coaches and everything else. I think, you know, after Ray Lewis retired and everything.
That really sounded like a horror film. What the hell was that?
Something that will be edited out.
Okay.
And Dave, go ahead. Dave, are you with us?
Wow, see, that music really did kill someone off. I can't believe we've lost a guest. This is terrible. Okay,
well, Nick,
we
what's
lost.
your final thought?
Yeah, we lost Dave for the time being. Okay, my final thought is going to be I hate that phrase final thought. I sound like Springer, but what I would say is I'm excited by the fact that two strong defenses have led their teams to this game in a time where defenses have essentially been neutered by the way the league rules have been to allow receivers to run essentially freely down the field and allow quarterbacks to chuck and pray their way to victories. To see that two teams led solely by their defensive leaders, Patrick Willis for the 49ers and Ray Lewis in his final game for the Baltimore Ravens, have taken their teams to one game short of a championship is incredible. And we're seeing two growing stars in Colin Kaepernick and Joe Flacco, who's been doing this for quite a while, who finally is getting the respect, despite being the only quarterback in recent memory that has only seen playoff appearances in his time in the NFL. And I think that's going to continue for quite a while. And that being said, Baltimore needs to step up and pay him in the offseason. Otherwise, I will be more than happy to take him in Oakland. Mike Leon, thank you so much. Dave, wherever you are out there, thank you so much as well. Mike, we'll talk during the week, and then we will shift gears, ladies and gentlemen, to I think the NBA and college basketball. Thanks for a great NFL season, and we'll definitely, of course, break down the Super Bowl next week. But we will be changing focus, everyone. Once again, youtube.com/NPZ1978 for the show. Mike Leon at the Kid Leon DAKIDLEON at Twitter, and of course NPZ1978 at, or rather Twitter. And Dave is somewhere. Center 1603. God, I hope he's okay. Thanks for listening.
So do I. Have a good one, man. Enjoy the Super Bowl.
Thank you. You too.